It is the fall, going into winter of 2023 right now in the standard meta, but it might as well be the summer or the spring of 2022. Sometimes it feels like not much has changed in standard since Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and Streets of New Capenna came out at the beginning of last year, and it's been well over a year at this point since even Shieldred came out. So standard has felt stale for quite some time. The standard song remains the same, and how do we fix that? It's been getting me thinking, what if I could make my own Magic format? Now, it would basically be standard. Look, I'm sorry, I know not everybody loves standard, and half the people who used to left 5 years ago because that's about how long standard has sucked. Probably slightly longer than that if I'm being honest with myself. But you used to love standard for a reason, because standard used to rock, and I firmly believe that we can set things back right again. But to do that, I also believe we have to make sure that people aren't playing the same decks when you come back that they were playing when you left in the first place 18 months ago. So, long story short, we got some housekeeping to do. That basically means there's a bunch of stuff on the chopping block, and you and me are going to spend some time tonight chopping it up. So let's look at how I would fix standard. Wait, what? Is that too pretentious and self-important? Those are the words you're going to use? All right, well, let's look at how I would make my own format. Is that still slightly too narcissistic? Who cares? Just roll the intro. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. Subscribe to the channel. It's almost spoiler season, baby. All right, let's get on with what we're doing today, talking about how I would do a standard. And I keep wanting to use the word we there, but I will not presume to speak for you, especially considering a lot of you might be mad with me by the time this thing's over. But don't be mad. It's just cards, baby. I have no power at all. I'm just screaming into the void, and thanks for coming along on the ride with me while I do that. Now, the first thing we have to do when we consider what I would do about standard is what of rotation. That's a hot button issue. It leads to a big old fat nightmare decision point immediately, because you have to decide what to do about all these cards that aren't even supposed to be here in the first place. Your Innistrad, Crimson Vow, Midnight Hunt, blah, blah. So there's like a bunch of sets that we expected to not even be here right now, and somehow they're still sitting at our lunch table with us, and we're kind of side-eyeing them, but we'll talk to them. We're friendly people. So what do we do about all of that? I think it basically comes down to two trains of thought here. You either ban every single card from like 5 sets completely out of existence, or you like the idea of a slightly deeper standard with more options, and I like the second thing more. So I'm not going to kick any entire sets out of standard. They can sit with us. This is in fact a cheerocracy, so I think instead we should focus on what individual cards we should target here. But aha, I've caught you in my very sophisticated logic trap, because you see, I think even that is a bad idea. My friend, instead I think we should focus on the decks that we are sick of seeing in this format. Which I guess if you wanted to be a little bit more objective about that and not use feelings, which, you know, warning ahead of time, I will probably do multiple times in this video, I think that you could just sub that with the decks that have proven themselves to be the most powerful, most dominant decks in the meta over an extended period of time, and have more than overstayed their welcome in standard. I got 2 big contenders for this slot, and then I got a bunch of other decks I got my eyes on, and we're going to alter them somehow, but there's at least 2 decks in this format that I wouldn't mind if they just didn't exist. But I want to go ahead and say that that's not necessarily the point of altering the format in this video. I want to nerf decks. I don't want to ban them out of existence, but if it happens, it happens. They've been in standard long enough. So the first thing I want to target is the deck that put 3 different decks in the top 8 of Worlds this year, and was both decks in the finals of that tournament, and maybe even more worryingly, on MTGO very recently in the standard preliminary, basically every deck in the top 8 was this deck. Let's target Esper right quick. Why don't we? Aren't you sick of it? I'm sick of it. As far as I'm concerned, in best of 3 standard, this is the top priority. This deck has existed since at least Rafine dropped in Streets of New Capenna. That was April of 2022. So it's been a year and a half, something like that at this point. It's been long enough that Esper Legends has been a deck, and Rafine banned. Rafine banned. Just straight up banned. Look, I am going to, let's excite some part of the viewership here, because you guys keep talking about this whenever I do these what would I ban videos, which is kind of what this is in disguise. But one way or the other, I will restrict cards in this video. So, hey, you guys keep talking about it in the comments section, we should restrict cards. I'm going to restrict some cards in my format. in this video, but Raffine's not one of them. We're going to talk about the cards I'd ban from all these respective decks first. And Raffine is the first thing to go. It's just a little bit much. I think we've learned that over time. Have we had enough time to learn that Raffine is a bit much? If you get this on curve, if your opponent gets this on curve, more likely, then you're in a lot of trouble because, see, you're trying to have fun, play Magic with different cards and stuff that maybe people haven't seen in Standard before. And they just play Raffine on turn 3, and it turns out there's a reason why this card is like top 8ing every tournament multiple times, no matter how many entrants there are, is because the card is just way too powerful on curve or off. It just kind of doesn't matter. It has an immediate effect on the board state too. It's just kind of a crazy. Let's ban this card. I would do that in my format, but I'm only going to ban one other card from this deck, and it's actually one that I really struggled with, went back and forth with, and you would not think that I would do that with Shieldred the Apocalypse. Do I ban this? Do I restrict this? I want to alter it in some way. What do I actually do? But I think that this will actually hamstring a great number of decks that a lot of us, I don't know about all of us, but a lot of us are very well sick and tired of at this point in Standard. I know we're all sick and tired of this lady right here. I mean, that much is basically a given. I think I can say all, right? When it comes to the individual card, but I understand that this will affect not only the Esper decks, the Esper Legend decks, the Esper normal mid-range Esper decks, but also the blue-black decks that were somewhat dominant a few weeks ago, right? But the Golgari mid-range decks and the mono black decks, and yeah, sure, it's fine. It's fine with me. Totally fine if all of those decks are also pushed down slightly on the tier list. But I am going to restrict a card from this deck, and it's Plaza of Heroes. Yeah, maybe I don't want this deck to exist. I'm not actually sure. I know that this actually does kneecap a couple of other decks in Standard, like the Selesnya Humans deck that plays a whole bunch of legendaries and wants to play Plaza of Heroes, but like pretty small casualty, in my opinion, at least, but one way or the other. I think that the Esper Legends deck could somehow, somewhat survive, considering it's still got cards like Dinnik and blah, blah. Yeah, I know. Yeah, Skrell was in the deck. There's Urtai. I can name other cards that deck could still ride with and be really, really good. So I'm going to take away Plaza of Heroes because I've been annoyed by this card too often. See, I told you I'd use feelings. I think I did it with the Shieldred entry too. So it's going to happen. But after you've faced off against the card for long enough, feelings are valid at some point. I think that's a hot button issue. I think that's more controversial than I thought it would be when it came out of my mouth. Discuss in the comments section. I think that feelings are valid. Feelings should be valid. In any case, I have, and a lot of other people that I've seen online have fussed about this card enough at this point, because once your opponent has the untapped mana and this out, it kind of feels like you can't do nothing. You can't do nothing at all. So I don't like that feeling, but I guess that's okay. People have to win games of Magic. Plaza of Heroes lets them do that. So I'm not going to completely take this card away from you, but I am going to restrict it down to 1 copy per deck. I think I'm over-justifying my restriction of this card because I actually think it's going to be one of the more controversial decisions in this video, but we have other decks to look at that we're going to target for this video, and I did say that I had 2 main priority targets for banning almost completely out of the format, and I think we've almost done that with Esper, but obviously some combination of blue, black, and white can still be good. You've still got plenty of good cards to make Esper work, so I don't think it's dead or anything. I just think maybe that version is. So let's move on to another deck I want to do that with. Let's not completely kill this deck or anything. I think it should still be possible to build a ramp deck in Standard, but let's take the ramp deck down a notch. Can we do that slightly? It's winning most, like, especially smaller tournaments, and it's still putting, 2 or 3 copies in the top 8 of larger tournaments too. This is a deck that's been around for quite some time now, and I'm about done with this one too. However, I'm not going to say that this one is all about how long it's been in Standard. This is just about its positioning in Standard, right? At this point in Standard, it just seems like one of the absolute best game plans, bar none, is to just go way above everything else. There's not a whole lot that's fast enough to catch you, and a lot of the mid-range decks just do dinky stuff. Oh, you're playing creatures on turn 4? Okay, so I'm just not really sure. You're playing 1-for-1 removal against my Atraxa. We'll see how that works out, buddy boy. So, I just think that right now, ramp is one of the more sort of obvious plans in Standard because there's not a whole lot that people can do against opponents who go over the top right now. So I think that ramp just needs to be kept in check a little bit, more than a little bit, because the things you can do at the top end of standard right now are just absolutely ludicrous, and why would you not do them? Especially if we're going to kneecap Esper, you got to do something about ramp. So that's my long-winded over justification for that. So what are we banning from this deck? Atraxa. Atraxa gets banned. I, again, waffled back and forth on this one, but eventually I decided to just pancake her. You know what I mean? Like, you could restrict Atraxa, but again, then they'd still have it. But I guess if you restricted it, they couldn't use an Atraxa to draw into an Atraxa, which always feels just awful. So I considered this, but at the end of the day, I feel like the go over, again, let me revisit this for 2 seconds. The go over the top strategy in standard right now is just so unbelievably powerful and able to skip past what everybody else is doing, that if you were able to play Atraxa, you would just definitely do that no matter what. So I think that nerfing her by restricting her would be an idea, something you could try, but I'm just going to ban her so we don't have to worry about it. How about that? I'm just banning, I just don't want to have to worry about Atraxa. It's been long enough. But I am going to ban another card outright from this deck, and it's a really controversial one, I think, but I have my justifications. Atraxa is probably already like kind of controversial enough, but in the last round of bannings where there was a fake ban leak and all that, and even before that, people were talking about we should ban Atraxa from this format. I wouldn't be surprised if they did that, and then it didn't happen. So I think that Atraxa won't be that controversial, but Sunfall might be. I think this sweeper in particular is a step too far. It is not the last sweeper that we'll talk about banning or restricting in this video, but it is one that I think is actually too much. One of the reasons that I'm banning it, though, is because there are plenty of other sweepers just in this color, not to mention other colors like burn down the house and blah, blah, but just in white, there are plenty of other good sweepers you can use. By invitation only is better than you think it is, I promise. So is Vanquish the Horde. These are good sweepers, I promise you. White Sun's Twilight, that thing wins games by itself. These are good sweepers. I can basically assure you, you don't need Sunfall, but Sunfall is unbelievable. Not only does it leave that relatively big body on the table most of the time, especially if it's in the late game, but there are just too many ways to completely wipe the board of not only creatures, but options. There are a lot of creatures that go into the graveyard and get value somehow in this environment, and Sunfall just cuts all of those options off, and it just feels like too much at 5 mana. Again, I know that this is probably going to be a controversial one. We haven't had Sunfall for too long, and it's a sweeper a lot of people adore, but I think there are just too many other good options. You're not losing much by losing Sunfall, but other decks are gaining a lot by you losing Sunfall. That said, you still have options. You still have things you can do. You still have sweepers you can play. So again, Sunfall is a lot for these Atraxa decks, and sometimes just one Sunfall is all they need to completely paste you. So I'm going to get rid of this card. I know, weird, but I think it also affects Azorius Control, Mono White Midrange, and other decks that might look to come up the ranks once some of these other decks fall a bit. So I want to fudge around with their numbers a bit too, and I think getting rid of Sunfall helps do that as well. But I'm also restricting Italy. Yeah, you're going to ramp into like Titan of Industry. You're going to ramp into something fair, and you're going to like it. Now, Italy is about as powerful as Atraxa. It is very, very close. So what I don't want is a situation where Domain Ramp or whatever, just still, it remains the most powerful deck in the format, becomes even more powerful because of the nerfing of Esper and other decks, right? So I don't want a situation where Domain becomes the only thing you want to play because, okay, we lost Atraxa, we'll just play Italy instead. So I'm also going to nerf that idea, nip it right in the bud, and say that you can only play the one of Italy. Again, I could do this with Atraxa as well, but I felt like if I was already going to restrict Italy, I should probably just ban Atraxa. That was just another nail in the coffin for banning that card. But as far as Italy goes, again, I don't want you to just switch to Italy from Atraxa and call it a day. I want you to do some thinking, so I'm restricting this card. Now, those are the two decks that I wanted to hit the most going into this proposal for a new format, but there are some other decks that I want to look at. Like I said earlier, I fear that there are other decks that could rise up the ranks pretty quickly and easily without these other decks being around. So I want to go ahead and nip that in the bud as well while we're into it. And these are decks that have also been around for quite some time at this point. They have served their purpose and they've had their moment in Standard, and I don't know that too many people would miss them if they were to leave. However, that's not going to hold true for everybody. You can't please everyone all the time, and I know that I'm going to make some people angry by proposing that we do something about Azorius Soldiers, but in best of 3 at least, it is the single best aggro deck in the format, and has been for quite some time at this point, at least since Harbin was printed. But Soldiers has actually been a deck for slightly before that, actually. But I would go ahead and ban Harbin out of this deck for a number of reasons. It's the only card I'm banning from this deck, but Harbin makes it so easy to come down and win the game that turn very easily, and a lot of times it's what Soldiers decks are looking to draw to ensure that they win the game. Overall, I just think it's one of those kind of like press button win game cheat codes of a card that's not a great play pattern that people really appreciate playing against. And if there's one thing that I want to get across in this video, it is that play patterns that are stale or predictable at this point, or eye-rolling even, which I know is an emotion, are reasons to ban cards in Standard. I've gotten pushback on that point in the comments section in past videos when I brought that point up, and I just want to stick to my guns here and say that beyond obscene power levels, right, the prolonged presence of a card in Standard creating predictable play patterns, that there aren't necessarily better things you can do, it's just the best thing you can do, and that creates this black hole of predictable play patterns, that to me is definitely a reason to ban a card. Now, the Soldiers deck actually gets more restrictions than any other deck, but that's because all three of these restrictions actually kind of target other smaller, lower down the tier decks in Standard that, again, I'm afraid would be nipping at the bud to get up here in the higher ranks of Standard. So, again, these restrictions will hurt Azorius Soldiers, but they'll hurt a bunch of other aggro and mid-range decks as well, like the restriction of Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. This card's been around since the Innistrades at this point. I mean, I think we've had enough of it. This is also going to be a shot to the Esper Legends deck, the Mono White Humans deck, which is a really good aggro deck in Standard here too. So I kind of want to just lay my hand on that one lightly. I don't want to touch it too hard, but I do want to lightly. Now you can play spells now, Mono White Humans deck. So that's not too shabby, right? You can play more ossifications now that you don't have to play Thalia. Or you can play one Thalia, who knows? But still, there's other restrictions I want to make in this deck, and one of them is Coppercoat Vanguard. Not only will this nerf to a great degree, I think, the Soldiers deck, although you can still play Soldier, you still play Valiant Veteran, you still have options for Anthem effects, it's still a good creature type centered deck, but still, I want to take out Coppercoat Vanguard to, again, not only affect the Azorius Soldiers, but affect the Mono White Humans deck that I think is just going to be de facto the best of three. That's hard to say. The best of three aggro deck if we nerf these other aggro decks I'm looking at taking out. So, again, I think that Coppercoat Vanguard being restricted, not banned, will hurt the right decks and allow other aggro decks to thrive in this new environment. So the last thing I want to restrict from this deck that I heavily considered banning after all this time in Standard was Wedding Announcement. I think this is really good at protecting Planeswalkers. It's pretty good for tokens decks, and I didn't want to take the option away from those decks completely. So I think restricting it is right. I think that maybe the Mono White mid-range deck can still be a deck, even if it doesn't have access to all four of these. So at the end of the day, I decided it can still hang out a little bit, but you can only play one copy of Wedding Announcement in your deck. Now, the next deck I want to look at capping out the power level of just a little bit on the old Scouter there is Mono Red. Now, I know Mono Red actually is a kind of a controversial one, because I think, and a lot of people do, that Mono Red is the measure of a healthy format. If a Mono Red aggro deck can thrive and survive, that means your format is probably at least okay. There's always room, like Jello, for Mono Red aggro. The other 50% of the player base cannot stand this deck, hates it for whatever reason. They just can't. It's the bad guy for most Standard formats. Everyone hates Mono Red, and is one of the more eye-rolling, inducing, Magic decks of the last 20 years or something, 30 years of the entire game's history. So I can understand why some people love and some people definitely hate Mono Red, but I'm not going to lay hands too hard on this deck. I am, however, going to touch it lightly and say that I will restrict some cards. We won't ban anything. First of all, I'm going to restrict a card I love very much, but I do think that taking this card down to one copy is going to make the Mono Red deck playable, but not dead. And again, that's mostly my aim, especially with these decks here in the sort of lower tiers, not the first two decks I talked about. So let's restrict Monastery Swiftsphere, even though I love it. I love it so much. You go in all of my cubes, I just love, you're a great card. Really good Magic card here, but all that said, I think that Monastery Swiftsphere is what gives the Mono Red deck a great deal of its juice right now in Standard. Just one of the better one-drops you could be playing, but I'm going to restrict the other one-drop you could be playing, and this is the one probably the one card in the video that I went back and forth on the most, but I wanted to do something else to mono red that would help kneecap this deck just slightly, and I think all we really have to do is Monastery Swiftspear. But that said, I really wanted a second card in here, and I've put in Kumano Faces Kakazan. Now this is going to hurt, say, red-white modify and Gruul decks that want +1/+1 counters on their guys, or like Gruul Audric decks that play Ruby and stuff. Like, there's a lot of decks. You know, Imadane's Recruiter, Boros decks really like Kumano Faces Kakazan. This is a card that's in a lot of decks, and I don't want to completely nerf all those decks, although I do slightly wonder about the Imadane's Recruiter Boros deck. It keeps like 6-1ing and 7-0ing events and stuff, so like maybe that's a good deck. We have to touch it slightly. So again, I think that maybe we do something a little bit about one of the best red 1-drops that's literally ever been printed, and I am 100% serious about that. Just because it's in standard, don't let that cloud your vision on how good Kumano Faces Kakazan is. This is still a 100% incredible blowout Magic card that sometimes does feel like a bit of a mistake, you know what I mean? So I am restricting this card. I am doing that, and we'll see how that works out. But while we're talking about aggro decks, I'm actually going to ban a couple of things. I'm just ban happy this video. I think there's a total of 9 bans and 10 restrictions or something like that. So we're a little more than halfway through. That feels good. But there is one more aggro deck that we have been dealing with since Kamigawa Neon Dynasty in February of 2022 that I think has served its purpose in standard, and that is coming from a guy who loves Enchantress decks. I have told the story 100 times on the channel that one of my first decks I ever actually sat down to really build like a real Magic player and not just, oh, I like the art on this card, was Selesnya Enchantress, back before Selesnya was even thought of as a term in like 1995 or whatever. Look for Duran Enchantress. I love me some Enchantress decks a lot. I'm building Sithis Harvest Hand right now in Commander. It's just, I love Enchantress, and I cannot stand Enchantress decks in Standard. At this point, it's been long enough, man, so I'm just going to ban Jukai Naturalist and Generous Visitor. Just get out of here, both of you. Jukai Naturalist is a ridiculous, it's a hell of a drug. It's a great Magic card that just lets this deck do unbelievable stuff starting on turn 3. And Generous Visitor is just too much. It's too much, man. It's put in your Commander deck, put in your cubes and stuff. For if you want there to be a green-white enchantments deck in your cube, I often do. I like it as an option there. I think it's a super good card in those environments. But it's just, God, this card, man. I just want to get rid of this deck. And I think that more than getting rid of Calyx or Kami of Transience or Michiko's Reign of Truth or like some other card like that, I think that just kneecapping, just getting these two guys out of here more or less guarantees the non-existence of that deck. And again, this is from someone who loves Enchantress decks. I'm over it. I'm done with it. I was done with it like 6 months ago, and it keeps happening. But there's one more deck that I'm going to target specifically in this video, and it's a deck that I've actually caught a fair amount of flack and a fair amount of support, for that matter, for kind of famously not liking in the current standard environment. And it's mono blue. Yeah, we're going to take a look at it. It hasn't done a whole lot lately. It's more of a best of one. You catch it on Arena. Sometimes it 5-0s a league on MTGO, right? So this deck is probably like tier C right now. But again, I worry that decks like this will quickly rise up the ranks when we take other options out of commission. So this deck is kind of on my radar, and I'm just going to restrict. I'm not going to ban anything from this deck. I'm going to ban a single card from this deck. I'm going to restrict, however, both Haughty Jin and Tolarian Terror. Okay, look. Here's the deal. Again, I catch a lot of flack for not only hating this deck, but like hating counter spells. Like, I am one of the most anti-counter spells as a concept people in the entire Magic the Gathering community. I have caught so much hate. You have no idea what my inbox looks like after I release videos like, oh, control is boring and control players think so too. And like videos like that. I'm just having fun. I'm just saying stuff on YouTube. It doesn't matter. It's cards, but like people really take massive offense to me, some of my opinions about like control and just counter spells as a concept in the game. My biggest take ever is usually like the one I keep going back to is just like, I play cards because I want to play cards. Why is there a mechanic in this game that doesn't allow me to play the cards from the card game where you play cards? It always baffles me. But Richard Garfield made it a part of the game. Who am I? So I will say this. Some of you are going to say, oh my goodness, why are you even targeting this deck? You just hate mono blue and all that. From my perspective, I just restricted these cards. You still play with them. You know what I mean? I know it sounds like I'm being a jerk, but like troll on the internet or whatever. But like seriously, I considered banning these cards, and I was like, Dev, throw them a bone. You know what I mean? Like they get to have 4 Delver of Secrets and then one of each of these guys. It's not bad, you know. You can still play mono blue. So, like, I just don't want this deck to be, you know, one of the best 3 decks in the format immediately as soon as this format becomes a thing, which is really a lofty premise, isn't it? But one or the other, I would do something about the existence of mono blue right away, again, because I'm worried about what it does. It's already super annoying to play against, and I hate it. Way too many people play it in best of 1 queue already, so I'm going to do something about these. It's my format, and I can do that. Now, we're not quite done here. That is all the specific decks and cards that I would target from them, but there are 3 more changes that I would make to Standard I didn't know how to finish that sentence, so let me just say the same thing twice. Now, there are 3 cards that I either just do not like, and I've been very upfront about that, or again, I feel like they would rise through the ranks of Standard too quickly, and they're decks that I just don't like, and I don't want to have to face even more than I already do. So with that in mind, first things first, the Wandering Emperor is banned. Okay, again, this will kneecap some tokens decks and the mono white deck, soldiers to an extent, Azorius Control pretty greatly, and other decks that play the Wandering Emperor, which is nearly all of them. You know, Orzhov mid-range. How did I forget the word for Orzhov? Like, every video I mention how Orzhov is my favorite guild. How did I screw that up? But one way or the other, this is in a lot of decks, and it has been since Kamigawa came out, again, February of 2022. It's been in Standard, and I feel much the same way I did when Settle the Wreckage was in Standard. My opponent has 4 untapped mana. I know they have it. I roll my eyes. I talk about how Standard is predictable. I hate Magic. So let's make things slightly less predictable in Standard and give our opponents less of an out against these aggro decks, especially considering I am detuning a number of aggro decks. I would like to take away one of the best tools against aggro decks and see how all those things shake out. So no more Wandering Emperor. We've had it long enough. Another white card that I would get rid of in Standard that I have been very upfront about. This was actually the number 1 card on a list of cards that I would ban in Standard a while back, and it's still here. It's Farewell. I would ban this in Commander like tomorrow, but they keep printing more cards. There's a new card in the Doctor Who set that's basically another version of Farewell. They just keep printing it. Everyone hates it. In every format it's available to play. Like, everybody hates this card. And I'm just very much done, like, assembling all the cool, janky stuff I wanted to do. I used artifacts. I used enchantments. I used creatures. All that stuff. I got, like, a whole versatile board full of stuff that's hard to stop. Farewell. Just farewell. Farewell. I had stuff in my graveyard. I had plans for all of this stuff. So I just hate this card. I've always hated this card, and because it's my format, I'm getting rid of it. Farewell cannot exist in my Standard. And finally, last, like, change I want to make to Standard in this video. Venerated Rod Priest is restricted. Look, you can play your Toxic deck. We're nerfing all these other aggro decks to a degree. That means people are going to want to get in there with their Jawbone Duelists and their Skrells and the Bloated Contaminators and all that. And you can do that. I'm fine with that. It's totally cool. I think it's cool. Crawling Chorus is a neat card. Right? Bilious Skull Dweller. Get in there with Billiam. I like these cards. But what you can't do is give me 20 poison counters, double what you need, without ever actually even tapping your guys to attack. You can't do that. Now, I'm still going to give you Venerated Rod Priest as a one-of in your deck, because I think it's a cool card, but it gets absolutely busted in multiples, and there are multiple tricks in Standard to get multiples out. So that's a lot of multiplication, and I'm just kind of done with, like, Ivy Rod Priest into win game, ? I do think, however, that in a format where you only have access to 1 Venerated Rod Priest in your whole deck, if you can turn 1 Venerated Rod Priest into Ivy and keep both of them on the board, I think you deserve the W, so I'll give it to you. You can play 1 copy of Venerated Rod Priest, but I do fear that if we left this as a 4-of, this would be one of the better quote-unquote aggro or really tempo decks in the format, and this is exactly the kind of deck me and a lot of people hate playing against, because you don't really play against it. You just kind of sit there while it does the thing. So I think that's kind of not good in Magic, and I don't want to play against it. However, that doesn't mean I don't have more to say. You would think that's exactly what it would mean, but I've got more to say. So one of the reasons I've been taking this so quote-unquote seriously the entire time is I'm actually in the very, very early stages, I want to make that clear, of talks with some of my Discord folks about organizing a tournament in this environment, this proposed Standard format. So if you're interested in that, my goal is to make this happen sometime in maybe early December, after the initial, sheen of Lost Caverns of Ixalan has started to fade off a little bit, right? Maybe give it a couple of weeks or a month, and then try out this format. For that matter, see if there's anything from Lost Caverns that's a little too powerful. But I also want to see if Lost Caverns makes this format a little bit more enjoyable as we add cards to the pool, and maybe we'll get some powerful stuff, or maybe we'll get a whole spread of good cards that add to the standard pool, and there's not even a need for this format. Who knows what could happen a month from now? So I do want Ixalan to come on out, but I also need some time with my people to organize the tournament and get people signed up and all that. So make sure you subscribe to the channel to stay updated on stuff like that. You can also follow me on Twitch, which is free, on Twitter, which is free, and on Patreon, which is $1. And I'm going to keep everyone updated on sort of the goings on with the tournament and what's happening at any given time, sort of through all of those mediums and methods. Aside from that, I guess my biggest ask for this video from you is that you go down there in the comments section and let me have it, most likely. I imagine, again, like I said at the beginning of the video, I hope this prophecy hasn't come true, but I imagine some of you are going to be a little upset with the ideas I proposed in this here YouTube video. So just really give it to me. I can only imagine some of the comments on this video. I imagine a lot of them are going to be the usual, like, you're just whining about standard. And most of those comments kind of sound like whining in and of themselves, ironically. But I'm used to it at this point. I've heard it all, so just give it to me. Why am I a big dumb idiot for doing all of this? Why did I ban Farewell? Why did I ban Sunfall? How come you restricted Kimono Faces, Kakazan? Did I explain those things correctly? Probably not. So again, just let me really hear it. Give me the earful down there in the comments section. I can take it. I've already visualized like 60% of the comments in my head. So surprise me and leave something positive down there. But we got one more thing to do today. It's the couch card of the day. I got to do like some kind of jingle. What is it? Because there's fewer cards on the couch. I don't know if you can see that. There's a bunch of crap on the couch. Not poop. There's like stuff on the couch. This is a wand that Wizards of the Coast once sent me. It's something to do with Dungeons and Dragons. And this is a map, I guess, of Middle Earth. I assume that's what that is. There's original Nintendo Power Strategy Guide for Final Fantasy 1. There's a bunch of stuff over here. There's Gran Turismo 2, as well as Final Fantasy 9. We got that. It's sitting over here. So there's a bunch of stuff. So, but there are some cards. So let's kind of go a few cards deep into this stack and see what this card is. What's this card? Oh, neat. This is actually somewhat relevant. This is Tattered Mummy. Everyone, this is Tattered Mummy from Amonkhet. It is a common. It's just 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 1/2 zombie jackal, and when it dies, each opponent loses 2 life. So this is somewhat relevant because right now I plan on the Halloween video being the mono black budget Halloween cube, baby. I've been really having fun building this thing. My first thought was, how would you do a mono colored cube? How would that work? And then I immediately was like, well, I'd want to build mono black. It's the best color. And then I thought, hey, Halloween's coming up. Let's build it with like a bunch of vampires and zombies and stuff and just make it cool. And that's what we did. Super budget too. It came in at less than $100. So before Halloween comes, as long as the cards that I ordered arrive before then, we're going to be putting up a video with, this budget mono black Halloween cube, and I cannot wait to get this cube out into the world because I'm really proud of it. It looks awesome, and I can't wait to play it for that matter. But anyway, I'm done gushing about all the other stuff that we're doing. We've got other videos planned about the top 5 universes beyond that I actually would like to do and not be mad about. We've got that video coming out, and of course spoiler season is coming up, baby, so make sure you are subscribed for all the things. I am done with your time at this point. I'm sorry. You can watch the next YouTube video you wanted to watch. I am Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.